So definitely next week we're fine. Probably actually it will be okay. Also, how far does this thing go? Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Yeah, for 2 weeks for sure.
So definitely next week we're fine.
Okay, I don't need to hear. Okay. Okay. Good morning. Okay, let's see this chat here. Okay. All right. I'll check it out, Steve. Thank you. All right. Very good. So. We 2 weeks ago when we last met, we were reading Sif Ches, and I'm just going to start from the beginning. I'm not going to redo the Mishnah Berurah comments that we did. Hopefully, we'll recall them as we go through. But that way, we're all on the same page here. So we'll start from 3 lines from the top of that page. My edition is Chavtes, and then we'll continue the Mishnah Berurah's comments from where we left off last time. So let's just remind ourselves. Here we go. Sifches, Simulation and Zion. Sifches. I don't know if everyone's got the spot here. Yeah, everyone's got it. Okay. So, Afal pi shemuter lahashos kedera al gabe kira sheyesh ba gechalam al pi hadrachim shenizbar b'simulation and gimel. Even though it's permissible to do shehiyah with a pot on a kira, where this kind of ancient miniature oven, probably was regular size for them, which had gechalim, which had coals at the bottom of the oven. Even though you could do that, as we talked about in Rishon and Gimel, we talked about the ways that it's permissible. Grufa, Ktuma, we talked about if it's a certain amount of it's cooked a certain amount, machloket, fully cooked, half cooked. Okay. So you take what's mutter, what's permissible in Rishon and Gimel, and now you put clothing over top of it, right? So it was perfectly fine, and now you covered over the pot with clothing. Obviously, clothing does not add an increased heat because of itself, but of course it retains the heat. Because of the fire underneath, and now you've created an insulation for the food. Mosif Hevel. Now the situation that you've created is Mosif Hevel, even though the clothing themselves is not Mosif Hevel. It's not increasing in the heat. Ve'asur, and as the be'er, I don't know if everyone has like a little star thing by the word ve'asur. I have it. It takes it to the side. The be'er hagola. This you need to add this one word. That's what the Beis Yosef in his other work before he writes the Shulchan Aruch, he wrote Asur. He just didn't write it here, so someone here appended this idea. And it's prohibited. It's not like he just writing words here with no end of the sentence. And the issue is here the Asur. It's not allowed.
We're talking about the fabric has covered the entire thing. There's nothing open on the side.
Right.
Correct?
Exactly.
Not like
enveloped. Yeah. Correct. It could be here that you have it on 3 sides covered, right? There's remember the Kira, the pictures that Steve Keller had showed us. I don't know if you have it here even.
Pictures here.
You have a picture here. Okay, so Tommy has a picture. Let's take a look here. I'm gonna try to show everybody here. The Steve's watching here. Steve Smith. So you have this is a Kira again. You have the 2 holes at the top. So you have here the pot. So you can see probably impossible to see here, but if you look here, there's almost like a cloth over top of it. I don't know if you can see that very carefully in the picture here. Right? I'll pass it around, and it's on 3 sides, right? It's not like it's it could be standing on the fire. I think, unless you tell me that it's all covered on, and then I put it on top of the Kira. Both are a problem. We're going to see that the other one's also a problem too. But perhaps
you might burn the fabric.
You might burn the fabric. That's why I don't think it's a smart idea in the first place. But certainly on 3 sides, it's definitely also an issue. So that's what's being described here. So again, you could take a perfectly mutter situation, throw a shirt on top of it on all 3 sides, And now it's become a problem. Umihu kolshu be'inyan she'eina begadim nogim b'kedera. But if the clothing are not touching the kedera, let's say, even though there's fire underneath the situation, kaven she'ein osa derech hatmana. Shari, since it's not hatmana, it's not enveloped, it's okay. We have another picture here. Boy, right. Okay, good. So this is very clever picture. Take a look. I'll show Steve here. All right. So you have this situation over here where it almost looks like you have the pot underneath here, and there's something that's holding it up all across, but it's not touching. So there are air pockets here on both sides between the wall of this thing, between the clothing and the pot. It has to really be touching. Right, that's here. Thank you so much, Tommy, for show and tell today. This is what's being described here, and that's not called hatmana. Hatmana means enveloped. That's not enveloped, and so that's mutter. Right? When they made the gzeira, they never made the gzeira in such a situation, even though it does retain heat in some ways, not as effectively as the first picture we saw, but certainly also pretty effective.
But I have a question before we continue.
Yes.
Because we said that we are not supposed to do atmana. Not atmana. Just put this on a gechalim because of you might lose the gechalim. Wasn't that like an issue with that gezerat not to put it on into Shabbat?
The original fear was that shemayat min beremetz. You may hide it. You may do hatmana in a pile of ashes where there's actually fire there, and then you will stoke the coals. You'll do something to try to increase the heat instinctively. So the rabbis across the board said no hatmana in a davar hamosif hevel, period. Because somebody might do it in this situation, they might do it in the situation where they'll play with the coals. Because if you play with the olive scraps, you didn't play with the fire. There's no fire there. But because of that case of the coals, they said all dvarim hamosifim hevel are off limits. And then they add, in addition, part of the gzer was even on Shabbos you can't even do it without she'eino mosif hevel. That's on Shabbos. But yes, the core reason for why this gzer was made was because of you might do hatmana in a pile of coals or ashes, hot ashes, real embers and fires there. Yeah.
So why are we saying this? Why are we saying that it's
because this is not hatmana. It's not enveloped on all sides. Meaning, what is the definition of hatmana is to be, lahatmin is to literally to hide something.
The issue was with the gechalim because you might move it, so you're not allowed to use gechalim.
Right. In the context of hatmana, but that's why he says here, kevan she'ein osa derech hatmana. Since this is not, you wouldn't call this hatmana. I mean, this wouldn't be considered hiding it. Hiding it, hatmana means like you hide it. It's not open on any side, and therefore it's permissible because it doesn't fit under the technical rules of the gezerah. And we are allowed to do shehiyah, as we talked about previously, over coals under certain circumstances. So it's cooked a certain amount. You rake the coals, to the side, whatever it is. We did certain things to allow it to be. Hilchot, let's keep going. Heicha shemamid kedera al gabe kira o kofach sheyesh bagechalim ve'in shulia kedera nogim bagechalim shihui mikre umuter al pi adrachim shenizbaru b'sivan reish nun gimel. So therefore, in a situation where it's mamid, it's the pot is standing on top of a kira. Or a kofach. Kofach was the exact same thing as a kira, except instead of two holes, it was one hole. Think of it as a miniature Talmudic oven. And there are coals at the bottom. The ain shule, but the bottom of the pot, the ain shule there no gim bagechal, but it's not touching the coals on the bottom, right? So there's so here again, it's on top of the kira or the kofach, but it's not touching on the bottom. So that's called shehiyah. Right. So when it's on all sides, so now I had a ha'ara in my brain. I had a realization in my brain. So shihui mikri mutra pi adrachim shenizbaru b'sivan again. So I want to retract one thing I said earlier. The case which I showed you in Tommy's, I believe the first one where it's enveloped, I believe actually must be on all four sides. Because the fire is, the coals are not at the top of the oven, right? The coals are at the bottom anyways.
It is, of course.
And in that picture? Okay, so that picture, you can tell? Okay, fine. So it's almost enveloped in the whole thing. And then I put it on top of a heat source. That's called Mosif Hevel. If it's covered on the three sides, this is a bit of a kula, but not the crazy one at all. They're saying what the Shulchan Aruch is saying is that's called shehiyah, not called hatmana, because on the bottom it's open. It's not literally enveloped on all four sides because the coals are at the bottom. You have a hole at the top of the oven. The heat, of course, is rising, but it's not touching. And therefore, since it's not touching, that's what he's saying here. It's not touching the gechalim, the coals. So shihui mikre, it's called shehiyah. What was that?
It says you can't touch the sides of the pot.
You can't touch the sides of the pot, meaning when you're covering it. Right, meaning if it's covered on all four sides, it's a problem. And coals on one side counts as a covering. But here, even if it's covered on all three sides, it is okay. Now, you have to be very careful. In our context, though, if you're using a hot plate or something like that, so the hot plate is like the coals, right? That's if your pot is flush against the hot plate, that's side number 4. Now you have the three sides. If they're covered on the three sides, that is hatmana. But here the coals are at the bottom of this oven, and that's why it's not touching. That's why it's mutter in the ways that we've talked about in Reish Nun Yemon.
Can I ask
Yes.
a question? The kira has 2 holes on top.
Yes,
Is it a single heat source
Yes.
for both holes?
I believe so.
So when you have something on one side, the heat is escaping out of that other hole.
True.
So is that still considered a full heat source?
If the coals underneath it are, they're continuing to burn to produce heat, yeah, I think we would assume that's
Even though the heat is escaping out of that other hole? That's
yeah,
not-
because the heat is, it's not decreasing, put it that way, right? If it's an Eina Mosif Hevel, it's decreasing as time goes on, right? Then you might be able to consider it Eina Mosif Hevel, but if it's continuous at the same heat level, right, for a certain time, and the coals will do that until they burn out, they will produce the same
Okay.
amount of heat, even though yes, a lot of it might be going out the other hole. But it's a consistent heat source that's that's there. So I think that would still be considered Mosif Hevel.
But isn't it saying that if you put the clothing on, if it's touching the pot, then it's Mosif Hevel.
If you put the clothing on it and you put it over top of the hole, even if there's another hole open, that is Mosif Hevel because you've now you've done hatmana,
So it's a fruit.
and now there is a heat source. It's not from the clothing. The clothing isn't what's producing the heat, but now you've created a situation of hatmana, and now you've added the Hevel because of where you put it, thus making it a problem. If you had just covered it in clothing the Erev Shabbos before sundown, that'd be fine on its own. But now you put it over the heat source. Now you've made it into a Mosif Hevel situation.
Not allowed to do that.
Not allowed to do it. Right, exactly. V'im, let's continue on here. This is the new material. V'im nasan ala kadera kli rachab. Let's say over top of the pot, you put a very wide vessel. She'eina nogeh b'tzidei hakadera. It's not touching the sides of the pot. A little bit like Tommy's picture that you saw before, or actually exactly what you saw before. V'nasan begadim aloso kli rachab. And now you take clothing and you spread it over the top of this wide vessel, which was over top of the pot. If any of you ever come across this in your own practical life in your kitchen, take a picture, please, and send it to the group, because I don't think this is something that we do every day where we put a wide vessel over top of it and then you put clothing over top of it. This is already not something that I think comes up all that often, but okay, let's understand the theory of it so we understand, all the principles of the law. The Kevan, where is this? Mutter. So he says here, it's permissible. Such an arrangement is permissible. Since the clothing are on top of the vessel, which is on top of the pot, which is wider than the pot. It's not like it's enveloping the pot. It's not touching the sides of the pot. Ein kan hatman. No, it's not hatmana. It has to touch on all four sides for it to be hatmana. You've created a contraption here that maybe you'll try to sell on Shark Tank, to try to keep things hot. But it's there's no hatmana. It's not touching all sides. It's wide, and then you put the clothing over it, so it does retain heat. It certainly retains some heat. It's not hatmana, therefore it's permissible. Take a look at Sifkat and Mem Beis in the Mishnah Berurah down below. Rachav. Huadin kishinosein al pia kedera, or you could put on top of the pot. Right, you have a pot cover, but not just any kind of pot cover. What do you get? You put a daf rachav. You put a wide board, some wide board, and it covers the pot, but now it also spreads out beyond the pot. Now when you put the clothing on top, and let's say it goes over the edge of the board, it's not touching the sides of the pot. It's further out, and therefore not called hatmana.
I'm envisioning a situation where you have a pot, say this size, and then you take a large mixing bowl and put it over. It doesn't touch the pot.
Right.
And then you're putting a bunch of towels over that mixing bowl.
That would
It's
be.
really a very effective.
It's very effective,
But it's okay.
but it's not hatmana. Right? It's not hatmana. At the end of the day, it's as long as it's not touching on all four sides. So it seems like you're in the clear.
So you can tent the pot.
What was that?
You can tent the pot.
Right. You can make it like a tent.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what Hinda's kind of describing here, which is that you can pretty effectively retain the heat, but avoid the definition of hatmana. So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. So let's take a look here at the next comment of the Mishnah Berurah.
It's like a double insulation, and it's okay.
Seems like it. Yeah, seems like it. Yeah. Yeah. By the way, here, if you're so Tommy, you have this edition, right? This one I have.
Yes.
So if you look at comment number 40, this is one of these extra comments on from modern day poskim.
Can you explain again with the kofach like the
Yeah, so that's when the oven, a kofach is just an oven with one hole, right? Instead of the two holes at the top. So a kofach is just one hole at the top. It's they imagine an oven where there's coals at the bottom. There's a hole on top where you can put a pot so that it heats up the bottom of the pot. So a kofach is just there's one opening. That's how it was built. A kira has two openings and a kofach has one opening. That's all. And then a tanur, we use the word tanur. It's a little bit of a problem because the word tanur obviously means oven, but when they use it in the Gemara, the word tanur, not all the time. Also in the Gemara, when you talk about a tanur, though, often it's defined as almost like a triangular shape. There's a wide bottom where you put the coals, and then there's a narrow. It all leads to a narrow opening at the top in order to have a large amount of coals. So you have a lot of heat, and it's all being concentrated in one spot. That would be a tanur in the way that the Gemara defines tanur. Okay. So mem. So I was looking at this comment here. So Vashira, so that you don't have this in front of you, like Tommy does, but Vashira Hafsek, how much space are you allowed to have it for? It's not called touching. Is there an amount? Vashira Hafsek Shabein Begodim LaHakadera. How much space can be between the clothing and the kadera to be considered? Okay, it's basically touching. Because you can always find there's one little spot that's not touching something. You have to be more realistic than that. So that's Agaon Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. The Agaon what was it? Rav Yashiv's first name? I'm not sure. Rav Yashiv, I forget his first name. It's in the acronym form here. Okay. They say both agree here. Should sarach shiyeh hefsek nikar. Okay, it can't be a millimeter. It has to be noticeable. Like in this case that she's talking about, or like Steve's saying with the tent. That's okay. That's not touching. Everyone will tell you it's not touching. But if you look at it and you say it's touching, even though maybe it's not touching because there's a millimeter that's not touching, that's touching. Okay, so they don't start to play games here, but lo die behefse kolshu. You have you have to go look under the microscope to see if there's actually a little bit of space between the two. And it's not hatmana. Chazal never had such precision. It's fine. I'm sorry, it's not fine actually. If it's basically touching, it's touching, even if you could find a tiny gap. Okay. All right, I think that's all I wanted to share from that. Okay, that way we're not too we're not overly literal in this hatmana thing. It's it's not just it doesn't have to be touching literally. It could be basically up against it. Okay. Mem Gimel now in the Mishnah Berurah. Ein kan hatmana. All right, if it's not touching on all four sides. You have this board over top of it that's allows you to have the clothing is coming down on all the sides. So now you have a permissible situation, and that's not called atmana. Mishnah Berurah says, "V'hine kol ze kasheyesh eish bakira." That's when there's a fire in the kira at the bottom of the kira. Aval im ein eish bakira klal. If there is no fire at all in the kira, the fire has been extinguished. It's no longer there. It was recently on, and so there's residual heat. That's very different, though. So yesh omrim she'en la'asor ha'amid kedera aleha u'lachasos ha'begadim. If right before Shabbos starts, I do hatmana on a pot with begadim, with clothing, and I place it over top of one of the holes of the kira. But the fire at the bottom of the kira has been extinguished. It's just still hot. So there is some, and let's say you're going to be eating 20 minutes after Shabbos starts. So it's enough that I keep it a little hot, keep it a little whatever. Even though right now I just extinguished the fire 10 seconds before the sun sets. So it's still it's pumping heat still. It's very hot. Maybe I put 2 pots, by the way, so I really don't let the heat escape so easily. And I have, let's say, both pots in my example. I do hatmana on them. And it's mostly hevel for the moment. It's increasing the heat. Mikol makom shari. That's permissible. Because that's not really, he's going to say it. Well, let's read it, and then I'll let him say it, then I'll explain. Tedavka al gabe gefes, when it's on top of gefes, so that's like what's the substance of gefes? Sorry, let me look. I want to make sure I translate this correctly. So, okay, one second. Here we go. To get to the dictionary here online. Okay, gefes. I'll make sure I translate it correctly. Here we go. Gefes. Peat. Oh, that's the olives. That's the olives, right? Peat, turf, pressed hard mass. A peat made of olives. Gefes shel zaysid. All right, so it's a pile of. It could be a pile of whatever food scraps that are creating heat.
What's the difference between when you don't have the fire? It doesn't. It's musipevel, but we have the fire. It's not musipevel. I don't understand.
Well, I mean, let's explain this line. That's why I want to finish the line, and I'm going to explain that exactly. Good, so good, important points. The dafka al gabe gefes v'chadam. It's like food scraps that like the olive scraps, which increase heat when you place it inside. Similar situations. Osr mishum deroy lehatmin besocha. That's when they said it's not allowed because you can do hatmana inside of them. Right, inside the pile of olives, inside the pile of sesame seeds, inside the pile of whatever. V'gazru, and those items, those piles, we made exera shema yatmi b'remetz because you might put them in a pile of ashes where there's fire, where there's actual fire, where you'll play with the coals. Aval hacha, in the situation where the fire has been turned off in the oven, but it's still very hot. You can't do atmana in the karka of the kira, in the bottom of the kira. That's why there's a little bit of cold, and you put the things on top. It's not fitting to do hatmana in the bottom. What are you worried about? The whole fear is that you put it in a pile of coals and you'll stoke the coals. So the rabbi said, okay, don't put it in a pile of olives either, because you'll get used to putting in piles of things. Here, there's no pile. There's nothing you can put it into. Yes, the rabbi said if there's a fire underneath and you did hatmana on top. Okay, that's mosif hevel. It's too. We don't like that. But here the fire is off now. So yes, it's still very hot, and it's kind of mosif. It's kind of mosif hevel, but it's really not mosif hevel because it's only going to decrease as time goes along. It's just that it's very intense heat right now, and that might be all you need for the 20 minutes until you sit down for your Shabbos meal to have your food still piping hot. So Hilchach, you have nothing to worry about. The rabbis didn't make a gzera in this situation because what are they worried about? You're going to play with the coals? You're not going to play with the coals. The coals are now not there anymore. You've removed the fire from the whole situation. It's not like gefes, which is what I just told you, the pile of olive scraps, for example. The gefes, mostly that actually increases heat on its own, that pile of olive scraps. If there's no fire, the whole reason that an oven gets hot is because of the fire. So now that the fire has been extinguished, not just you push the coals to the side, by the way. Here it sounds like you put the fire out. There is no fire in there anymore. As time goes along, it may take a while if you cover the holes, the temperature will decrease. Science. But of course, there are some rabbis who, of course, are machmir in this situation. What would be a halachic discussion without someone who's machmir? Okay, there are some who are machmir. By the way, at the bottom of the Sharatzin, he quotes Das Harash, but this is the Rosh is machmir about this, as is mentioned in the Torah and the Beis Yosef. Okay, so you have here, not actually someone who's not a small figure. The Rosh is a very big figure in halacha who is machmir in this situation. Ela imkein maniach kli odaf rachav ala kedera, unless you put a wide vessel or board over top of the pot, from the on top, and then you put the clothing on top, like they just described. As we just wrote, as was written in the Shulchan Aruch. But if those who are lenient in this situation, don't protest. It's fine. They have, upon whom to rely. If they are being lenient and they envelop the whole pot, the fire is off. So if you see someone do this, by the way, you do this, whatever. That's your tradition, your custom. Let's say you take a pot and you completely envelop it on all four sides, and you turn off the heat source. So an example of this would be, let's say you have a hot plate or something like that, or you have let's use this better example. Let's use you have a crock pot, and on the crock pot, so the crock pot is already enveloped, let's say on three sides, right? I told you this whole thing with the mishigas, the people do with the aluminum foil ball. Okay, I don't need to do that. But now let's say you take a towel and you do put it over top of the crock pot. Okay, now you've done hatmana. But let's say you turn the crock pot off right before Shabbos starts. This is the case. Now the heat source is off. It's still hot. It's still, the coils are still hot underneath, so the heat will still continue to rise. And now I've enveloped it in a towel on the top. That's this case. And that would be, according to the Rosh, no good. He doesn't like it. But according to others who the Magen Avraham, Masha Hevi Poskim, who are quoting from Poskim, it's permissible. So that will be a equivalent situation. So on Friday night, you don't want to leave your electronics on, but you want to still have hot. Sometimes I make meatballs, by the way, for Friday night in the crock pot during the day. It cooks throughout Friday during the day, and then it's ready Friday night. So let's say I turn it off right before Shkiat Achama, sunset. I put a blanket over top of it, so it's Eina Mosif Hevel Erev Shabbos. Can't do it on Shabbos. According to the first opinion, it's okay. The second opinion, not happy with that. And that's to say that would be a practical case where this could come up. So he says here, now he gives you practical cases in those days. Now, if you could tell me what he's describing here, points on the next test. V'al pizeh teida, and on this basis, what we just described, you can understand the following: Demashin ogin lahamid coffee, o tavshil be'erev Shabbos mi be'od yom al hatanur milamala Umechasin osam bebegodim. He says this explains the practice of those who are ma'amid coffee. I guess here they made a pot of coffee. I'm doing my best here. You help me out here. If you understand better than me, or a pot, or something else, or some other cooked dish. Erev Shabbos, before it starts, on top of a tanur, milamala on the top. So they've made the pot, they made the food, or they made the coffee already, and they cover it on top. Clearly, they have also turned off the fire. Otherwise, this is a description of right. If it's mechasem and begodim, if it's covered in clothing, and you put it on top of a fire, we've talked, and that's not even a question. That's definitely hatmana. Obviously, here the fire has gone off. Okay, you turn the fire off. You can imagine, by the way, if you made a fresh pot of coffee. I'm just looking at the kitchen right now where the coffee maker is. You make a fresh pot of coffee right before Shabbos starts. The coffee machine goes off. The heat source is off now. You want to keep the coffee hot, so you take the coffee pot. It's still sitting on top of the thing, and on the other three sides, you kind of cover it with a towel. You want to keep it hot so you can serve your guests on Friday night coffee, because you don't want your guests to sleep. I never understood it. I'm serving caffeinated coffee at 9 o'clock at night. Okay, it's fine. Right. The Avshalo Yofeheim Osin, even though what they did is not nice, it's not beautiful, because then the Machmir opinion doesn't like this. The Das Poskim Machmir, according to the Machmir Poskim, they don't like what you just did. They don't like this custom that people used to do. And again, I don't know. Anybody ever do this? Where you made a pot of coffee and you leave it on the heat source, but you cover it all three sides. I don't know maybe how they made coffee. I imagine they must have made it in a pot, right? I don't know how before there were coffee makers. You made a coffee. You poured it through a filter, or was there some other, or did they boil? Did they boil water with the coffee beans in it, and then you have water, water that's now turned into coffee?
Or you have Turkish coffee, which is actually drink the grounds.
The grounds go into the coffee.
Right.
The grounds go into the coffee, so
I
you
have
boil
the
them.
so I don't have to get a Pesach.
So you boil. So when you do it, you boil the coffee beans with the water.
Boil the water, and you just
It's like a
add
powder. It's like a
ground.
powder. For
Yeah.
Turkish coffee, it's like a powder. You put it in a cup and you pour the water on top. The water.
It's absorbed by the.
It's like.
Got it.
Like to make it.
Like instant. I was gonna say it sounds like instant coffee.
It's
So
a lot stronger.
I'm sure.
Stronger.
You're right. Got it. Okay, so you imagine some situation where you've made a fresh coffee or whatever, and now you want to keep it hot for the guests Friday night, and you do this. So okay, that apparently was a minhag that people did. But this is a reporting of a minhag. That's it. The ma shanog and the hamid coffee. That's what they did. So there's already a custom to rely on this lenient opinion. It's not inconsequential when you're talking about a halachic discussion that there are actually people who have done this. So he says here, the heat of the oven is strong. So the Macher opinion doesn't like us unless you place some sort of wide board on the kedera. The yesh don't protest these people who are making coffee in such a way or some other food in such a way. The yesh lahem alma shismochu. They have upon what to rely. B'chaniz kalel, as we mentioned before. So if I had to guess here, the Mishnah Berurah himself probably doesn't like this, the lenient opinion, the way he's writing it. But there's lenient opinion. I actually didn't look at the Aruch HaShulchan. I should take a look after we're done here on the report next week. If there's a particular minhag here. The nafkamina is my case about the crock pot. Some people don't like to leave their electronics really running if they don't have to on Shabbos for safety reasons. So can you retain the heat by covering over the crock pot that's been turned off? Okay, let's take a look here at the next. Continuing the next part of this Mishnah Berurah. Let's say you put chol on the bottom of the tanur. What's chol? Sand. Okay, you're putting dirt, sand or whatever at the bottom of the oven. So now, what do you have? You have sand. Chol is considered one of the substances as we described before that is mosif hevel. I'm not here to tell you scientifically if that's the case, or not. That a chol is considered the most of hevel. I think it was like
Extinguish the. Yeah. That's what it does.
so what they're saying now is that in instead of the fire there, you're putting chol. Right? I'm just looking here. I don't even remember being on the list, by the way. You'll see in a moment here. Take a look. Well, let's finish the comment. It'll make more sense in the complete context. Since you're not, even though you're not going to be matming the whole thing in the sea, you didn't put enough sand in there that you could make you could envelop the pot inside the sand. There's not enough sand for that. Rather, the bottom of the pot is touching the sand. And now on top of it, it's covered in clothing. That's certainly no good. So let's say you take one of these other substances, olive scraps.
How is it touching the because of the hole?
I guess you're filling it, and it's all the way to the top, so it's touching the bottom. And sometimes you could put the pot, by the way. Sometimes it's in there. I mean, I don't know if you have a picture. Sometimes you have the pot. You could put the pot down a little bit into the hole. Right? I mean, the bottom of the pot, because many pots, by the way, today even they get a little wider towards the top. Right? So you could put the pot down into the hole a little bit.
There's a picture where it doesn't make sense.
Let's take a look. This one?
Yeah.
Oh no, okay, this is what he is describing. Okay, take a look. Here. While you're looking at it, I'm going to reread this phrase again, and then when it comes back, I'll show Steve on the computer. But think about the words that we just read. Thank you, Tommy, for bringing the picture book today. This has been really helpful. On top of the tanur, not in the bottom of it. On the top, in the picture, you see it. You put a pile of sand. I don't know how here. All right, so take a look. Here you have your oven. This is your kira. There are two holes here. On hole number one over here, there's a pile of sand and dirt, maybe you might even call it here. And in such a way, I don't know how it's not falling in. Don't ask me how it's hovering. But maybe you've done something to maybe it's a more thick dirt. It's not like sand that just going to fall in. Or maybe you filled the entire thing with coals here, and now once you put enough sand, you could create such a situation. But bottom line is, the pot is now sitting on top of the sand, and on top of that, you have the hatmana situation with the big oven. Thank you, Tommy. Okay, so now again, if you put it on top, again, I have no idea why anyone would do this, but okay, you put the sand on top, or the dirt on top. Like in the picture, you're not going to do hatmana entire. You can't pile up the sand that high that you're going to be able to do this. You just put it on top. The bottom of the pot is standing on the sand. When on top, it's covered in clothing. Why? Because once again, you have a situation here where you have heat source underneath, and sand on its own is considered a heat source. It's mosif hevel, right? And therefore, it's like having a fire underneath, with then on the other sides having a covering, because Rina and Shema Yatmin Bokulam. And we're worried that you will be matmin the whole thing in sand, even though part of it is in sand and the rest of it is covered in clothing. The Gzera here extends to the idea that you can't even do that because lest you put it all the way into the sand in a different situation. Okay, again, I'm not so sure how often this comes up in practical life. So
it must have been something. I mean, the reason.
Of course, I'm sure that this was not foreign to those who originally were speaking about these cases. Yeah, but it's hard to imagine us coming across such a thing. The kofek kli rechavo. Let's say you cover it with a wide kli again, a wide vessel, or a wide board. As we talked about before, now you have the clothing on top of that, so it's kind of not touching on all sides. So that, of course, we're going to be consistent. Mutter, that's permissible. Even half of it is kind of enveloped by the sand on the bottom part, right? Nonetheless, it is permissible because it's not hatmana. Okay, that is the end of Mem Gim.
Excuse me, I'm missing something.
Yes.
So you have an oven, and then you have sand, and you put the pot on the sand. The oven's extinguished. You put the pot on the sand, that's no good.
Yes, I
But
believe
if
that's
if you have an oven and it's extinguished, and then you have sand, and you put the pot in the sand, and then you tent it, it's okay?
yes.
Doesn't seem to make sense.
So you're saying the case about the tenting over the sand because it's not touching on all sides, because there's no hatmana, right? If there's no hatmana on all four sides, it's not enveloped. It's always going to be fine. In the case where sand was a problem was the sand is the bottom layer. It's over top. There is heat that is coming in from the extinguished fire. Plus, on its own, sand is mostly hevel, right? Sand is mostly hevel on its own.
Mhm.
And I envelop the pot on all the other sides. So now the rabbi said, no, Gzeira, that you might envelop it. Yeah, it's true that there's just begotten on all three sides.
So there's no hatmana on top of the sand. Okay, I get it.
Exactly.
How is it sent to see
Now you're asking questions that are that are beyond my ability. How is whole mostly hevel? I don't know, Steve. I have this thing, but I don't know if you picked it up. But Shlomo was asking, how is whole mostly hevel? To which I said, I don't know. I would have thought that whole is not mostly hevel. I understand the food scraps. I get that. I've seen with my own eyes compost piles, right? Food scraps that are pipe is burning hot in there, right? If you really make a nice compost pile, I don't understand unless I'm not translating the word chol properly, and I'm going to go to the Jastro right now while I'm saying this just to make sure that there's no translation here that I'm missing. I don't fully understand how it's most hevel. I don't. Did they say? They say sand. Yeah, I don't.
Maybe it's outside and the sun is hitting.
Well, no, if it was on the fire before, but it heated up, it pulls the heat.
Right. Sand retains heat or cool air also very well also, right? Like if you go to a beach that it was cold at night, and then it's now the morning and it's warmer, when the atmosphere is warmer, the sand is colder. So sand, I don't know, I'm not as
They may not be referring to the kind of sand that we're thinking of at the beach. They
right.
had deserts of sand, and there were probably other kinds of sand that they were dealing.
Right. By the way, so I found here right now in the Jastro on my screen.
Definitely not beach sand.
Right. Sand region, the sand used for glass making. Just looking at the different definitions here. Yeah, sandy region, seashore, desert. Yeah, I mean, maybe they're imagining, kind of sand you're going to find in the desert. You go to, Arizona on a summer day, and you're walking around in the desert area. Yeah, I don't know. So I don't fully understand that part, but I will say that their observations, Chazal's observations, are generally when non-medical things. The medical stuff was not just their understanding; it was the world's understanding about you put a pigeon on your stomach, and there's some strange things in the Gemara when it comes to medicine. But when it comes to observations about what increases heat, they were pretty good at making correct and accurate observations. So I'm sure this makes more sense if we understood fully what kind of sand, as Steve was saying, that they are referring to. Yeah, so that's my best answer to the question. Okay, 8:28. Okay, let's just read a little bit more here, and then we'll pause. Back in the Shulchan Aruch, v'chein muter lahaniach hakadera b'tanurim shalanu al yedei shehitein besocha chaticha chaya. V'hu shelo tehei hakadera nogas v'gechalin. V'af al pi shemechase pi hatanur bevigadim. Even shein habigadim nogim bakadera lav hatmana hi v'shari. Again, this speaks to the principle of hatmana. It is also permissible to place a pot in our ovens as long as you put a piece of raw meat, right? Because otherwise you run into the other problem that we talked about, that when it has raw meat, it's out of my purview. I'm not having it tonight for Friday night. It's for Shabbos day. I'm not going to play with the coals. I circumvent the whole problem with the coals when I have a raw piece of meat, as we've talked about in the past in this dish. But importantly here, you also have to make sure, so that's allowed, but you have to make sure that you don't put a kedera, the kedera touching the coals. Okay, so you can't put the kedera touching the coals. Again, I do want to emphasize, you can, if let's say you're making
You're talking about the manai or just put it?
stop. Let's say we're putting it inside an oven, and it's before Shabbos. Let's say before Shabbos, I put it in an oven, and let's say I'm making cholent. You're making an oven cholent. It's one of the rare situations where you can make, you have something in the oven cooking on Shabbos. Let's say Erev Shabbos, you put in cholent, and there's some raw meat in it, so it's not gonna be ready until the next morning. And let's say I don't even need to do grufa or ketuma because it's raw meats right before Shabbos, and then I want to take it out the next day ready for lunch. Obviously, I can't open and close it. Take it out one time the next day. So the problem could be if I place the pot at the bottom of the oven, and now we don't have these kind of ovens, but where you could actually literally put the pot on the coals, or pot or pan, however you're making this food. And then you could even cover if it's not touching it, let's say on a rack inside the oven, above the coals, and you cover the holes of the oven, right? You imagine the two holes, you cover them with begadim. So now you've created a box where the heat doesn't easily escape. So you're really you're retaining the heat is pumping and it's retaining. Even though it's covering the piatan begadim, kevan shehabegadim nogim ein habegadim nogim bakadera. Clothing is not touching the kedera. So la hatmanahi. It's not called hatmana, and it's permissible. Shari.
It's like our oven.
So what's the chilush?
That they're enveloped on all sides.
Yeah, I mean,
But it's not touching. It's not touching. Right. Correct.
So
It's like on a rack.
It's the same situation that.
The chidush, yes, it's repeating the same principle in a different context, which is you've created a box essentially where it's retaining heat. You have it's retaining.
You put meat in there, or chicken.
Well, if it wasn't raw meat, now you're running into the problem of shahia of I'm gonna play with the coals. That's why I'm saying let's assume that there's raw meat here, right? Because if it's not raw meat, then there are other calculations to worry about here, and it's permissible. And he even writes, the Ramah here adds, the hatmana that we do here in Poland, where we put it in the oven, and we close the opening of the oven with the clay covering. So again, it creates the box effect. So shari l'chulei alma, everyone says that that's okay, which is really a repetition of the same thing that was just said. All right, u'kemotion isbar le'el siman reish dalad, as we talked about in reish dalad, the isbar le'kaman sof siman reish tes, and we're going to talk more about it in the next 2 simanim from now, in the context of muktzah, the topic of muktzah, u'mitzvah. Now, we'll read to the end of the Ramah, then we'll do all the Mishnah Berurahs next time. This is one of the most often quoted teachings of the Baal HaMaor. The Baal HaMaor, you'll find him in the back of the Gemara. He lived in Provence, in southern France. That's where the region where the Ravid was famously came from. The Balamor, the Balamor and the Ravid were rivals. Actually, they didn't like each other. The Ravid wrote a whole perush attacking the Balamor's commentary, for attacking the Ramban's commentary on the Gemara. So this one is he doesn't get quoted too often. This everyone knows the Balamor. And here the Rama quotes it as well. It's a mitzvah to do hatamana, right, on Shabbos. I mean, before Shabbos for Shabbos. So you could eat hot food on Shabbos. That's part of honoring and delighting in Shabbos is having hot food, delicious food. If you don't trust the words of the Chacham, here's how you're allowed to do Hatmana. Here's how you're allowed to reheat food. Here's how you're allowed to do Chazara. It's not just in the context of Hatmana, by the way. The Oser Achilas Chaim, these laws are too complicated. I'm just going to have cold food for Shabbos. It's easier. And you basically prohibit in your own house, you basically prohibit having hot food because it's too complicated. Or it's too tricky. It's too dicey. Right? We suspect that maybe you're an apikoros, maybe you're a heretic. Then where does he belong? Why would he go with such strong terms, apikoros? Because the Karaites, it says in the Torah, lo sivaru eish b'chol moshvo seichem b'yom hashas. So the literal interpretation is, I shall not have a fire in my dwelling places on Shabbos. That's why they don't have lights on Shabbos. The Karaites didn't have lights. Even to this day, I think there's the Shomonim, was the Shomonim, the Shomonim, the Samaritans. I think today they have literal translation of the Torah. They're a small group of them in Israel today.
Well, the Karaites are growing in Israel.
Oh, so that's the Karaites. So that's the Karaites. They're the ones who do a Korban Pesach today, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
They still do a Korban Pesach in Israel today. Not on Har HaBayit. Boy, that would be a political firestorm. They did, right? Forget it. They're not doing. They do it somewhere else as a holy place in Israel. They're whatever. They have a tradition. It's funny. They're some ways they're Jews, but their traditions are so different from ours. It's not even. We're different peoples in terms of our laws. Again, we have a same lineage that goes back a certain way. But the Karaites, their interpretation was of the literal of the Torah, and so therefore they sat in the dark, and they would never imagine having an ongoing fire on Shabbos where I could do Chazara or Shehiyah, or I could do Hatmana for Erev Shabbos and the Shabbos. And therefore, I believe that's why he said Shem Apikoros. Maybe you're an Apikoros. Maybe you don't use fire on Shabbos because really you're with them. You're with the Karaites, and you don't use fire on Shabbos because you reject the interpretations of Chazal that it is permissible to have a fire on Shabbos. There are certain restrictions, right? Anyways, that's the famous comments of the Baal Hamor. Any yeshiva bacher could tell you who's learned the Hilchot Shabbat or Masechah Shabbos will tell you exactly that's the comments of the Baal Hamor about you have to have hot food on Shabbos, otherwise you're not bikors. I want to end this way though. If you do want to have a cold Shabbos meal one time because you enjoy cold food on Shabbos, that's okay. I think here really the key is that you, for halachic reasons, you don't want to get involved. It's too complicated. It's too this. It's too that. That's a Karaite drusha. So we don't do that. All right, we'll stop there. We'll probably take at least 2 weeks to